He's right there.
This episode of the Bucktails podcast is brought to you by Pistol Creek and Trip Sporting Goods. Pick his head up. Yeah! Look at that. Woo! Good deer, babe. I've got with me today Chris Shipe, and we are co-teachers, or not co-teachers, but we teach together at North Hall High School. And I'm going to share my screen here and show the deer that we are here to talk about. If I still have it up, I have it somewhere. I'll just share my entire screen. All right. So here is the deer that Chris killed. I'm not sure if he's got it scored yet or not, but it's a huge 7-pointer, mainframe 6 with a G3 on the deer's right hand side. I mean, just a massive buck, towering, main beams everywhere. I mean, it is a huge deer, for sure. But that's what we're here to talk about today. But Chris has been on the episode or on the show once before for another big deer he's killed down there on their hunting property, and just a great hunter. Me and him talk about deer all the time at school. So Chris, kind of the start to your year. We're already into November now. You killed this deer back in bow season, so just let me know a little bit about how your year started. So what's been going on so far?
Hey man, I just want to say thanks for having me on again. I always enjoy it. But this hunt, we've been hunting this deer for about 4 years now, I think. Um, I had a good friend of mine, Brian, down, and I stuck him in this hardwood bottom down off the edge of the lake, and it was his first time being down there hunting. And that morning, he came out, and he was. I'm guessing he was 3 or 4 then. Brian said he was a long deer. He was a big mainframe 6, just a huge 6-point. And that's kind of when the whole journey on this deer started. I've gotten pictures of him over the last 2 or 3 years, sporadically. Last year, he really started coming in on that feeder, and he started showing up quite a bit. And that's kind of when I could, started patterning him real good. But this year, this year was a tough year for me. I lost my dad in May, at the end of May, which is a pretty tough thing. And the whole summer, was kind of just shot. So I didn't really get out and fill my feeders up and things like I usually do. But, it was always in the back of my mind, like, man, this is going to be the first, year without dad going hunting. So I don't have that guy to call and, you know, shoot the crap with and just kind of figure things out. I always trusted his wisdom and his experience and things like that. So leading up to this hunt, it was my first year without my dad, and this buck had been showing up. I started feeding in August, early August, and him and a couple other shooters were showing up pretty much every week, every day almost. So I kept diligently going down in there, trying to keep my scent down. These older bucks, y'all, if they get a whiff that you're in there, that could be enough just to send them out, and you'll never see them again, or they'll go nocturnal and you won't see them. So going down in there, I was real careful this year with my scent, filling those feeders up, and leading up to bow season started. Um, I couldn't go down that opening weekend, and they had been showing up the week before, him and another one, pretty much every day, morning and night. So that Sunday before after bow season opened, I drove down there and filled that feeder up. It was empty, and it took me 4 hours to drive down there and fill it up. I just went down there, filled it up, came back. But that Friday before we talked, and I was looking at the forecast of the weather, And the way that I'm set up down there, I need a north wind. I need at least, and a northeast wind is perfect. Well, it just so happens, checking that weather forecast, that northeast wind was coming, but not only that, but it was going to be in the 50s, September 18th, 19th. And that's kind of unheard of in Georgia. So it was just the perfect time to go in on them. You know what I'm saying? Um, so I told you, I was like, look, man, I'm going to take 2 days off. If I got 4 days, I'm going in, I'm going to get them. I'm going to at least see them. And that happened to me last year, and I missed a good one. Rookie mistake. I didn't arrange them right. But this year I knew, those first 2 weeks in November, or those last 2 weeks in November, I could get a shot at a good one. So once I saw that forecast and I was like, the wind's going to be perfect, it's time to go. And the temperature dropped. Everything looked good. I took some couple days off of work. That Friday, I was like, I made my mind up. And then all that next week, I just shot. I shot, 12, 15, 18 hours a day, just getting, used to it. And, you know, leading up to that, I got down there. I was trying to get down there Thursday morning, but or Wednesday night, but I wasn't sure. I changed from expandables to fixed blade, and I was still experimenting with that a little bit, and I was still hitting up high plate, you know what I'm saying? But I wasn't quite there. And like I said, man, I knew this was going to be a situation where, like, it's put me in, coach, you got to be ready to go. I mean, I had a feeling I was going to get a shot at one of these deer. So I practiced and practiced and practiced. Finally, I got comfortable with those new broadheads. And Thursday morning, I drove down. Um, the feeder was already empty from Sunday. 350 pounds was gone. So these deer are building that energy up, that mass, to go into the rut. And I'm just kind of at the bubble of where there's a lot of bucks. And I don't want to really go into that bubble so much. That's why I like that feeder, because I can draw them out of it without putting all my scent and everything in there, and that holds them. And that's real important, when you're trying to grow big bucks, if you have private property, and that's, something you can do. But they were showing up, man, religiously. And I went in I drove down Thursday morning, filled the feeder up, took a scent shower, sprayed down, let everything dry, went in, filled that feeder up, drove back out, and then walked in and started hunting. And my reasoning behind that was because you're going to leave some scent, but if I go in and fill that feeder up, the scent I leave could possibly, they just be like, oh, okay, he was just in here, That might sound weird, but there's something to it. So, and I was in scent lock and everything, had gloves on and everything when I did that. So I came out, walked back in and started hunting. And I mean, I was lit up with deer that whole night. And the way it's set up is I have a shooting lane that's running pretty much east to west. And I have a tower redneck blind up on the top of the hill that's looking at that feeder. But archery season, I can, get a little closer to that feeder. But the thing is that timber's been cut probably 30 years, maybe 20 years ago. I mean, it's not tall at all. So the only way I can hunt that feeder with a bow is a tripod stand. There's just not trees big enough to do it. So last year I bought a tripod, and I mean, this thing is only 10 feet off the ground. But I found a little patch of trees. It's a couple pines and some pin oaks, about 3 or 4 pin oaks, and it just makes this perfect little cove. And I just took that tripod and I mushed it up in there. And I'm sitting about 30 yards off that feeder. I got a lot of cover. So when I went in, I just kind of eased to that feeder. I sat there that night and I saw 12, 14 different deer. I mean, there were deer at the bottom of the ladder, and it just was so weird to me because I'm usually up high, usually climb, so I'm like 25 feet up, so it's not a big deal. But being 10 feet off the ground was weird, and I mean, there were deer all around me, all on the feeder. Um, didn't see the shooters, but saw like 5, 6 bachelors, 5, 6 doe. But when deer are on the feeder, there's other deer working around it. So I mean, literally, they were 8 feet from me. It was crazy. It was awesome. My heart was beating, and that was such a good thing to have that, like, to kind of get your adrenal glands going and kind of fight through that, because the next morning was just it was something else. But watched deer for 2 hours, and then finally at last light, I see a doe start coming in right at the edge of the woods in the shadows, and there is just huge deer behind her. I mean, I could see the top of his rack, and I could see he was wide and tall. I could see he was long, a lot of mass, but it was just black. He was just back in the shadows, and he was playing it smart. He was staying in the shadows, and he let that doe come up to the feeder, and he just watched her. And uh, I watched him, man. I turned the light on my bow. I got up on him, but it was just too blurry. I just couldn't make out where he was, his body. And she was eating, and I mean, lights fading. But we have a
Oh, I lost your mic.
I'm sorry. We have a lot of sand down there, so I could see him on the lane, but I couldn't see him in the edge of the woods. And I mean, it was 4, 5, 6 minutes. She came in and started feeding finally, and he was inching, just 4 feet, stop, wait a couple minutes, 4 feet, stop, wait a couple minutes. And I only needed about 8 more steps. And I guess the wind changed or something. And she bolted and he bolted, and that was it. But I hadn't hunted archery all year. That was my first hunt down there. And it was just a good break into it because the next morning was pretty special.
Yeah, man, I bet that was. I know you told me a little bit about that. How you had to watch him walk away, or how they bolted. That's something's tough to do. The target buck I killed last year. Luckily, the first time I saw him on the hoof, it was just him, and I killed him, so I didn't have to wait. I I got lucky. But a lot of people, especially hunting on a feeder, like you said, you had 12 deer around you the whole night, right up on you. So I mean, it's a whole other factor you have to worry about. Not only scent, but just being concealed. Like you said, you got good cover, which is good. But man, it's a whole other dynamic hunting on a feeder like that. And you've been feeding down there in the same area. How long have you had a feeder there, would you say, in that same spot?
I think this is my fourth or fifth year down there. Yeah, fourth year down there, fifth year on the north side. But yeah, so it's like I said, it's just a good tool to bring them out of the woods. And we're pretty blessed to have private property, and it's just family that hunts it. So our goal is managing the herd, and really just in the last 3 or 4 years, we always planted food plots. But feeders was something that we never really did because we really enjoyed like that free hunt. But you know, it's you get older, and feeders, especially if you don't have the best soil and the best crops, it can be a good tool. And like I said, man, you can draw a lot of deer out of some big woods, and you don't have to go in there and mess with it, and risk that chance of bumping a good buck out of there. And plus, what I really want is to maximize the potential of the genetics we have down there. and I want to kill some big bucks with the years I have left that I can hunt, So um, I don't do a whole lot, I can only afford to really run 2 feeders, and that's a couple $100 a month, but that's about all I can do. But uh, it is definitely it's different, like you said. When deer come in on a feeder, they know something's up. They are so cautious, and you have to pick your moment to go in. You have to know when to go in. Um, and you got to do your homework. You got to do your work. Like I said, you got to run cameras, look at these deer, figure out where they're at, get those big ones coming in there, and then pattern them out. Go down there, fill that feeder up, fill that feeder up, fill that feeder up, keep it full, and then wait for that perfect wind to go in. Maximize. You want to spend as least amount of time in there as possible. And now there's a lot of tools out there you can do that with, apps and things like that, that can really help out. And I'm kind of branching into that. I'm kind of an old timer, but those old timers can still teach you something.
Yeah, right, right. No, like you said, the technology nowadays is crazy. I know you run cell cams. There's almost a daily picture, like every morning. You showing me a buck that was there last night or a buck that was in there this morning, and we'll get into this later. But you've got a target buck, another one that was in there this morning, and you're a couple hours north of your hunting property, but you know exactly, when's a good time to go, when's a good time to not go, and like you said, if you pick your chances right, pick your right days, wait on that right wind, you can really maximize it
That
without
wind,
bumping
man,
them as
it's
bad.
still all
Yeah,
about the wind.
yeah, no, for real. But yeah, if you can not bump them out, and me and you talked about this before, about you've got to be a little gutsy sometimes. But if you're hunting a certain piece of property all year long, like you really got to be careful because you don't want to bump them. I mean, you may bump them to a different side of the property or bump them off of your property. Sometimes they don't care, if it's the rut or summertime, something like that. They're a little bit less, spooky. But other times of the year, those mature bucks, if you're not smart, and like you said, they can be gone or more often nocturnal is what I've seen on our property. I mean, we know they're there, but the only pictures we have of good bucks is 12, 1, 2 in the morning, and that's can't do anything about that. So
Yeah, for sure. And like, once you look at your cameras, and cell cams are awesome because you don't have to go in and leave all of that scent, checking them every time. But when they start daylighting, it's getting time, you know. Um, so I had a awesome hunt that uh Thursday night. My nephew Greg came over. We have a little cabin up there I was staying at. Um, and we hung out. We talked a lot. We talked a lot about archery. And, my grandfather was a big archer. We grew up in Northwest Pennsylvania. But back then, after war, when all the guys came home, he made his own bows. He made his own arrows, of course, recurves back then. And he killed a lot of deer. And like I said, up there in Northwest PA, back then, you got 2 or 3 deer a winter just to have some good meat. And they had big families back then. So I was telling him all about that. We stayed up talking till like 1 in the morning, and I was showing him the new broadheads I got, and he kind of looked at me and he was like, why do you do archery? And that's kind of when I told him about the whole family tradition thing about it. And I was like, it's just tradition, man. He's like, a crossbow would be so much easier. But I was like, no, this is what I love to do. And he's like, it's like the hardest way to kill a deer. And I was like, yeah, I know. But barely slept that night. I got up about 4 o'clock. Greg left at like 1. And I slept about 3 hours barely. Got up, took my shower, ate a little bit, chilled out for a little bit, got everything ready, and I'm looking at my phone, and both those shooter bucks are in there. And I'm like, I'm ready to go in, and they're on that feeder. And that's something else you got to think about is your access, because they're going to be in there. And how the heck do you get in there? Especially archery when you got to be 30 yards from the feeder. So I was watching. They stayed in there from like 5 to something. Uh, light about 7 o'clock at that time of year is when light starts coming in. So I was like, crap. But I knew that Big Six was daylighting. He would come in at about 5, but he would also come in about 9 the last couple days, and that Big Eight that I was after too. And I was betting on that. I was like, look, they're in there now, but I have got to get in there. And that's where your whole risk reward type, calculation comes into play. Um, Really, Eli, at this place, those last 2 weeks of September, I got them. I got them patterned good. After that, it gets a lot harder. So I really want to try to pick the best time to go in there, get in there perfectly, because that first sit is when it happens. Those first couple sits. And I was watching, and they stayed in there for a while, and then there was all these other bucks in there and does, and I was kind of like, what do I do? So I just waited a little bit, but I saw that sun starting to crest over the pine trees, and I was like, oh crap. They finally calmed down. There was a 4-pointer in there, and it's about a 5-minute ride in the side by side over to where I park, and then I walk in about a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile. So it'll take me about 20 minutes. So about 6 o'clock, I was like, look, I got to go. I got to get in there. Um, by that point, I was like, if there's some deer in there and I bump them, it is what it is. I'm not worried about it. So I drive across the field, and as I'm coming across the big field to get in there, I bump like 3 does. Then I come up, I bump another 3 does and a buck. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was a big one. It was real big. So I go in there and I go to park, and there's a dang doe standing right where I park, my side by side. And I was like, oh my God, man, I'm just screwing this all up. But I was like, I gotta get in there. He's gonna be there at 9. So I go and park. I walk in. There was like 1 or 2 deer that blew at me walking down, and it's pretty good access because it's like old sandy road. Um, so it's quiet as long as there's not a lot of leaves on there. Uh, I walk in, I can easily cut over and then go down that shooting lane and dip in my stand. So I get there, and I decided to go in when I didn't have to use a flashlight, when there was just enough light, just enough dark that I could walk without a flashlight. And I get down there, I get right to by my stand. I'm checking my camera. I'm like, okay, that 4-pointer's in there. Sure enough, I walk down. He looks at me, but he just bolts out. I climb up, get set, ready to go. And sit, and the sun comes up. There was a lot of dew on the ground. It was real wet. Once the sun started coming up, I mean, it was just almost like it was raining or sprinkling. So much dew, going from like 80 something to 56 degrees. I think that kind of helped with my scent, but I didn't see nothing, not one deer, until about 8:50. And at 8:50, I'm hearing some things behind me. Uh, and there's like a lot of, it's like a bird. I think it's called like titmouse, tufted titmouse. And they run in little packs, and they like work on the side of pine trees and stuff. There's always some down there. And I thought that's what it was behind me. I kept hearing something. And there's a big pin oak to my right, to my left. And I'm sitting there with the bow in my lap. And like I said, I'm only 10 feet off the ground. So I'm looking, and I hear something walking. And sure enough, I mean, 10 feet from me is that big eight. He's right there. I can see him through the branches. He doesn't see me. And then he steps out right in front of me. He's at like 6 yards. And I'm looking at him, and I'm like, oh my God. And he was big. He was a big deer. Um, but that other one was a trophy. And I heard something behind him, and I was like, well, let's just see what happens. I don't want to shoot him yet. Well, he was pretty bold. He just went kind of out. He stopped a couple times and went out to the feeder. And I still heard something moving back there. And he went out and started feeding. And I'm looking, being perfectly still. And sure enough, that big six walks out. And he's about probably 16 yards from me, but he's in grass and I can't like shoot him. I mean, he's so close I couldn't even draw on him. Uh, so cautious. I mean, he came out and stopped, and he would sit there and lick the air, look around, and stop for like 3 or 4 minutes. And then he'd take another 4 steps and he'd stop for 3 or 4 minutes. By that time, some other deer started showing up. Some little bucks started hitting the feeder with that big eight. And I'm looking at that big eight and I'm like, man, he's standing perfectly broadside at 30 yards. I could have shot him 50 times. And I'm like going through that metal game, like, do I take the big eight? That's for sure chance. But I'm looking at him and I'm like, man, that's the trophy right there. That's the one that all the guys have been trying to get out of there. And the other reason we're trying to get him out of there is he's a bully. He's a bruiser. He's bumping bucks that have way better genetics out of there. He's huge. So I'm watching him, man, and it was the craziest hunt, Eli. It was just so intense. You know, if you ever watch like a cougar hunt like a deer, you know, or something, how they'll take a couple steps and stop and kind of recalculate and take a couple steps. It was like that, but I couldn't move. It was just all in my head. I just had to like outthink this whole situation. And the whole time these deer are just filling up. And it was the same thing as the night before, but this time I got two shooters there. So he finally comes around, and after about 10 minutes, he starts working his way across. And when he comes out into the shooting lane, he's still in grass, but when he busts that grass and he's out in the open and I can see him broadside, I just about lost it. I was like, oh my God, man. And that's when I was like, like I said, this was my first hunt. Since my dad passed, and I was I wanted to get this buck for him. So at that point I was just kind of freaked out and I was like, Dad, what the hell do I do? And he kind of talked back to me, in spirit. He was like, look, you're good, just relax, he's going to come into that feeder, you're doing good. And sure enough, he came in and started feeding, but now he's facing me and there's 5 6 deer around. He's looking right at me, I can't draw on him. And another 2 or 3 minutes go by. And what saved me was another couple doe came down the shooting lane and he came off that feeder to knock them off of there. And when he did, there was a buck that was like eating the feeder this way. And then he was behind that buck. All right. So there's the 8-pointer in front of me and he's behind it, but he's facing the other direction, but I can see his whole body. And I don't know, like, I know you hunt with a crossbow, but arrows do a lot of funky stuff that like last 10, 15 yards, you know what I'm saying? So I was looking at him, I was thinking I could do it. And I saw his body. This was the first time I was like, okay, I have a shot. And I didn't have too much time to make up my mind. So I pulled my bow up. I sat the bottom cam on my knee. I got lined up on him, drew back, settled on his, that crease in his shoulder, just about 3 inches up from there. And I touched that arrow off. And I thought I was shooting high because I shot him sitting down. And I mean, the arrow looked so high. But when it got to the deer, the drop, it missed that 8-pointer by about 4 inches, his back. And that 8-pointer dropped like this. and just nailed that big six, like square in the shoulder, perfect center of the breadbasket. And I was like, oh my God, it happened. It freaking happened. I can't believe it. Um, I saw the arrow pass through, super clean. Um, he ran off, but he was kind of running zigzagging, as he was going. And I just lost it, man. I was like, oh my God. I wanted to cry. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to shout. Um, it was a special hunt. It was a real special hunt. I'll never forget it. And then right after that, I texted Brian, I texted you. Brian called me. It's like he called me right away. He don't give a crap, Um, and I told him what happened. He's like, "You're lucky, son." Yeah. And I texted you. Sat there for about 20, 30 minutes. I called Greg, told him what happened, and he came down there, and I knew I hit him pretty good, and I thought I heard him crash, but I wanted to play it safe. I talked to Brian. He's like, "Look, don't go bring the side by side in yet. You want to go find them before you bring that in case you bump them." I was like, "All right, that sounds good." So Greg showed up. He gets down there. We go find the arrow. The arrow, clean pass, like I said. There's blood up. There's bubbles. And we start tracking him. And I had found where he went in the woods. I put a stick there. And it was the weirdest track, man, because he was bleeding out of both sides. And he was zigzagging as he was running. So, like, you'd find blood here, then you find blood here, then you find blood here, then you find blood here. So we were super zoned in. I mean, just looking for blood. And we went about, I'd say 50 yards. And we're looking for it goes next. And I look up, and we're kind of in some of the sawgrass and stuff like that. And I look up, and in a little clearing, like 20 feet from us, there he was. He was laying there. And I was like, there he is, dude, right there. I mean, if we would have looked up the whole time, we would have saw him like way back there, but we were zoning on the ground. And I just remember looking at his rack and how tall his rack and the mass on it looked to his body, but his body was so long, and his gut, his belly was 2.5, 3 feet off the ground, the other side. Huge deer. I'm guessing he was 7 or 8 years old. He had this black mask, just a super mature deer. And Greg, he couldn't believe it. To be honest with you, hell, I could barely believe it. But we go up to him, and I did the whole props, to my dad and God and things like that. And he gave me a big hug, and we took that picture that you put up a little bit earlier, and that's how it went down.
Man, you you had me on the edge of my seat here about how that went down. Having to watch him take a few steps, wait 4 minutes, take a few steps, wait 4 minutes, and then with another shooter that any other hunter in Georgia probably would have shot, but you had the wherewithal to be like, no, I'm gonna wait on that one right there. That's what I want. That's got some ice in your veins for sure. But no, that story, that's insane. Like then he got up there and he was looking at you, so you couldn't draw. And that's something like you said. I hunt with a crossbow, so mine's a little bit easier. It's like shooting a rifle. You I keep it on a tripod. I lift it up, and it's there. But with a bow, it's a whole nother dynamic. You've got five on the feeder. You got to wait. When do you draw back? And like you said, thankfully you had a couple of random does come in that he wanted to run off. But holy crap, man, that's what was going through your mind whenever you heard, like, to me, bow hunting, one of my favorite things is you can hear everything. When you shoot a gun, you're deaf for a couple of minutes. Like, you shoot, you can see it run off, or they drop, hopefully, but with a gun you can't hear all the sounds, but with a bow it's so quiet. I mean, you hear all the deer run, you hear the impact. What was going through your mind? Like, when you saw the good pass through, you saw him take off. Like, what was like What was your thought?
Man, I just couldn't believe it. I was just in disbelief. I mean, it was such a release from that. I was watching them for 15, 20 minutes. I mean, it was intense. And to finally get to know that I waited and picked the perfect moment and then I made the shot. It's like coaching soccer, man. It was just like one of those things where like it all worked together. You're having to keep an eye on so many different moving parts at the same time. But when I saw that arrow sink and I saw it made a little mark right in the center of his shoulder, and I saw that end of it disappear. And I kind of do my flexions kind of Chuck Adams style, famous archer Chuck Adams. I love watching him growing up. I think he's an awesome guy. But he always does like two red fins or veins and then a white vein. So I did two white veins and a red vein being my cock feather, and then the white I can pick up the blood. And I saw that thing disappear. And the funny thing is it was almost like the perfect thing because you worry about sound, with the bow. I'm shooting a Matthews Adrenaline, which I bought back in 2007, and it's shooting about 320 feet per second, but that's plenty fast enough. Um, it was set up great for me, and I love that bow. So the speed, the sound was what I was worried about, but it was not a factor. Like, and I think that the 8 pointer being in front of him kind of threw the pick for him. You know what I'm saying? Because that 8 pointer, I mean, like I said, dude, I thought I was going to hit his back straps. I mean, it was close. I kind of misjudged my calculation on the drop of the arrow. I mean, it was a little closer than I thought it was going to be. That was the other thing that kind of amazed me. But the other thing is the reason why I didn't shoot the 8 because I knew if I shot that 8 in front of that 6, it was so sketchy, it would never come back. It would not come back to that feeder. And that's something else you got to be super careful about when you finally do locate that mature buck. I mean, he doesn't mess around. He'll be gone. Um, so yeah, it was just the feeling of, oh my God, 3 years of looking, dreaming at this deer, showing you pictures of this deer, and I got it with an arrow. And it was awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, and he's been a big mature 6 pointer for 3 years. I mean, that's speaks to how old he is. Like you said, I mean, every bit of 7 or 8 years old. And on the YouTube video and on the Facebook page, I'll post some more pictures of him. I'll see if you can find um, some trail cam pictures of him on the hoof. But I mean, just like the frame of that buck. I mean, if it's a 10 pointer, he's going to be 140s, 150s. I mean, just the frame of that deer is just gigantic. I mean, it looks like a dinosaur. It's huge.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
but yeah, and then
I think he would go 120, 125 as a 6 point. That's pretty impressive.
yeah, and that's like people don't understand what it takes to shoot a 120 inch, even an 8 or a 10. Like to break 120. I mean, we're in Georgia, so if you're listening, and you're in Iowa, you're like, oh, 120-year-old or 120 inch bucks a year and a half old. I'm like, no, not here. 120 is a big deer. I personally have never broke 120. Um, but yeah, 120 is a big deer, and I believe it 10,000% that it'd break 120 as a 6 or as a 7 technically, but yeah, 100%. That'd be 120 inch deer. Then to miss the back of that 8 pointer. But and that, I bet you were worried. You shot it. You're like, oh. I bet you're like, oh crap. I've spawned the 8 pointer.
Yep, yep. I was like, ooh, when that like as soon as that arrow dropped, I mean it was all slow motion. I was like, but it sunk in there just how I planned. It was awesome. As Ted Nugent would say, it was the magical flight of the spirit arrow if I ever saw one. For sure.
Yeah, long live the beast.
Long live
That's
the beast for
awesome. How
sure.
it was you said you talked about it being kind of a family tradition to archery hunt. I'm not able to do compound. If I could, I would. I love hunting with a crossbow, and that's one reason why I got a new crossbow last year because it's lighter, narrower, easier to carry, so I can hunt with it more throughout the year. It's not as aggravating, you know. But yeah, that's awesome. Back to the let's talk about your arrow setup a little bit. You talked about your what kind of vanes do you shoot, and then you're going to your new broadheads. What kind of broadheads are you shooting? Is it like a single bevel? Is it like a 3 blade muzzy, or like what kind of broadhead are you shooting?
Yeah, so of course, like all hunters, I like to shoot a broadhead that's flies just like my field points. And like I said, I bought that bow back in 2007, and I got kind of set up back then. And I was shooting Rage, uh, the triple blade with the rear deployment, um, which flew great. They would group kind of like my field points. But over the years, things have changed. I used to shoot 4-inch vanes. When those quick spin vanes came out, I went to the quick spins. So I went to I think they're 2.5-inch quick spin, maybe somewhere around there, 3-inch quick spin. So those were the vanes I put on. And then when I was looking at, there's been a lot of like debate lately online and with hunters and things about expandables versus fixed blade. And I did a lot of research, and it wasn't like I really had bad luck with those rages, but like I said, I missed that big buck last year. And what it came down to was when I'm in that moment, when I put all that work in, when I put all that time in, um, and I finally get a shot at that buck, what do I want on the end of that? And on that feeder, there's good chances that you're not going to get that perfect broadside shot. So I was thinking about bone and things like that. And some of the guys I've talked to said that they've shot deer broadside with expandables and they just bounced off of it like it hit a rib or something. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. So I ended up going with the tried and true Muzzy Trocar, the older version with the vented blades. It's just a 3 blade. Now I like 3 blades because in archery, when you have a double blade, and I mean, it'll still get within the pie plate. You know what I'm saying? It's not like you can't kill a deer with it. But that 3 blade, it has a little bit more stability on the front end, I believe, having 3 blades. It doesn't plane as bad as a 2 blade would. And they're double beveled, they're sharp as crap. Um, but, it's like 40, $45 for 3 of them. So that's not too bad. That's what I went with, and that thing just, I mean, it went through them like butter.
Yeah, no, and I think the biggest thing with a broadhead that people mess up on is making sure it's sharp. You know, people have used fixed blades for ages. I mean, think back to the Indians, arrowheads, but you had got to make sure they're sharp. And like you said, not having to worry about the angle or bone as much is a reason I used to shoot the G5 Montech. It's one piece of steel, so if it hits anything, it's not like it's a removable blade. Pretty easy to sharpen still. Um, but I mean, past that, a lot of it to me is you got to keep it sharp. The next part is you got to have confidence in it. I mean, if you're not confident in what you're shooting, there's no point. I mean, because I've got buddies who shoot Rages. I've got buddies who shoot Slick Tricks. I've got buddies who shoot the Magnus Buzz Cut or the Magnus Stinger, like big, like single blade, looks like a modern day arrowhead. And I shoot Schwackers. A lot of people I know shoot Schwackers. Um, and they all kill deer. To me, they're all deadly. I'm not sponsored by anybody, so I'm not, I don't owe anybody anything, but I've had luck with a Schwacker. But one thing I will say about Schwackers is about once you kill one animal and you got to pass through and it skips off the ground, the broadhead's done. So it's more expensive, but I mean they fly true out of my crossbow. I mean I killed a bear, a doe, a buck. My wife killed a doe last year. Knock on wood, we've had luck out of it. So it's like for right now, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But yeah, I'll definitely in the back of my mind, I've been thinking about going back to just a old fashioned fixed blade broadhead because it can't mess up, But there's a chance with any like a rage or a schwacker, anything that's mechanical, there's a chance it's going to mess up if you don't check everything or something gets bent or warped. I mean, you never know. But all in all, it's got to keep them sharp. You got to have confidence in it. Anything you do, and that's back this to fishing, hunting, anything you do outdoors, you got to be confident.
Yeah, for sure. And not only do you want to be confident in your equipment, and it all comes down to personal choice, Uh, work use what works for you and what you like. Um, but another thing is when you're talking about confidence is just even going in after that buck. Like if you don't feel like you're going to go in and kill that buck, you probably don't need to go in there and do it. You know what I'm saying? That's what type of hunt this was. It was such high pressure that oh man, I learned so much from this last hunt. It was probably the best hunt I've ever been on, but you got to be confident going in there. And I shot that whole week before, and I should have been shooting for months. I usually do, but it's like I said, it's just been a rough year for me. And but when I made the decision to take those days off of work and go in there, I was like, oh, all right, it's on now. I bet I have no choice. I got to get ready. But I was definitely like I said, I was like, if I knew I was pretty sure I'd get a shot at him. So if I got that opportunity, I wanted to be in the game. And that's what it takes to kill these mature bucks. It takes a lot of work, it really does. It takes a lot of homework. You got to know where they're at. And a lot of that's off season work. It could be food plots, it could be mineral sites, moving cameras around, but just pinpointing that big buck and then staying on the outside of his bubble. Try not to, go in and mess with them too much, and then just trying to, pick your moment to go in there. And that's kind of been one of my biggest things I've learned this year.
Yeah, I heard it somewhere before. I forget if it was a podcast or video. Somewhere I heard it, but it's you can with the technology nowadays, and we've kind of already touched on this, but with the camera technology, just the ability to know an inventory deer, be it over bait with a camera, obviously, you can almost know down to each deer, apart from the rut that'll change. Deer travel a lot, but especially like you said, late September, early season hunts where those bucks are still pretty patternable. I mean, you can know when to go and when not to go with a cell camera, because if you would have had a week where they're just not in there, like there's no point in me putting scent in. Maybe to go put feed out, but to stay for half a day to hunt, I'm not gonna go in there. Or you can look at the weather and all right, the wind's wrong, I'm not going. So like you said, you can stay out of their bubble, you can not screw it up, and yeah, I mean, that's the tools we have nowadays. I mean, you could almost, if you had enough cameras and know-how, this is kind of like the Seek One boys do it. They have I don't know how many hundreds of cameras out at all times. I don't know how people like that keep up with it, like the Seek One guys. But I mean, they could almost go and shoot 100%. Like as far as going in and having a very, very good chance at a target buck that they've got on camera. They know he's in there. They might not get a shot, but they know they're going to be in the game every time you go. And that's just so different from years past. I mean, even me growing up, going to our hunting club or hunting behind my parents' house used to, we would just go on a wing and a prayer. We've got back then you couldn't bait. So we'd have salt licks out or we'd be hunting a field and just hoping for the best. But nowadays, it's just there's so much information that you can go off of to make yourself more, like you said, give yourself more confidence. Like you said, you went in there, you went in there to kill. You weren't going in there like, oh, let's see what we see today. You're like, no, he's going to be there at 9 o'clock. I'm going to go kill him. You knew exactly what was going to happen, and thankfully it did.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you really touched on a lot there. Like, and there's nothing wrong with going out there and hunting like that and, going out and just seeing what happened. Heck, for the first 10 years we were down there, that's what we did. We didn't just have a lot of big bucks. Um, We started off with about 360 acres, and then eventually it grew to like 400 and something. Then it grew to 600 and something, and then that's where we finally got kind of the acreage to pattern big deer because big deer they cover a lot of ground. But there's nothing wrong with going out there hunting public. There's nothing going. I've done it all, and I enjoy it all.
Oh no, for sure.
And it's kind of crazy because it really like, I mean, hunting used to be like a poor man's sport, but it's not really that much of a way anymore. If you're not, lucky to have private land or to know somebody that has private land, you're going to be, like you with that has to have a lease. Well, for a lot of working guys, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 a year, that's a lot to lease out something. And that's just getting you started. That's just getting you down there somewhere to hunt. So if you want to do food plots or feeders or something, it's all on top of that. So there's nothing wrong with any type of hunting, I don't think. It's just it's just how deep you get into it, how invested you want to get into it, and you know, how much you want to put into it pretty much.
Yeah, and I wasn't saying that it was like this is the way to hunt. It's just like the ability to do it this way.
Yeah,
You know,
for
and
sure.
most of the time when I go, I mean, I'm still just going like I go whenever I get time now. You know, I've got two little girls, so if I get a free afternoon to hunt, by God, I'm going. I'm gonna be in the woods somewhere, and hopefully something good happens. But yeah, it's just the ability to pattern deer is just tenfold over what used to be, and I think as a result, I mean, you see a lot more. I've seen it a lot more up here in the North Georgia mountains. A lot more big deer getting killed. Like there's been a couple of good public land deer killed up here in the mountains. I'm gonna interview. Did you see the one that Dylan Hollifield killed? He goes to North Hall.
I did, and I passed them in the hall today. They were
Yeah,
excited. Him and Miller.
I talked
Did
to
they come
Miller
talk to you?
last year, and I talked to him today. And I told I mentioned to him and said, "Hey, see if Dylan wants to come on since y'all were together. I'll get y'all. I'm gonna try to record him after the break. So I'm gonna get it. I mean, I don't want to, with that kind of stuff with public land, you don't want to give away any spots. I'm not trying to get any spots. I just want to hear the story because it sounds like they went to one spot. I think they were going to Cooper's Creek, I think, and it was closed. So they ended up going up in the mountain somewhere else, and Dylan killed a giant. Like I mean, great for anywhere in Georgia, but especially mountain public land. I mean, it was a giant. Big. I don't know I forget what they said it scored, but it was a big one. But
Yeah, man. I was so happy for him. To see a kid 15, 16 years old that loves hunting so much and gets out there and does it. You can do all the apps and all that stuff, but how Dylan killed
yeah,
that deer was boots on the
yeah,
ground.
like I said, that's the polar opposite of what I was talking about a second ago. That's like they put boots on the ground, like you said. They found a spot. I assume they scouted some, found an area, and they made it happen. But yeah, I'm excited to hear that story. I'm sure it was insane because I think they were up there camping, so up on national forest camping out and killed that deer. I mean that has I can't wait to hear that story. But yeah, a lot of deer like that are getting killed in North Georgia. I think as a result of feeding cameras, people know they're there. I think that's I mean, it's a good thing. Some might say it's a bad thing, but I think it's good. I mean, it gets more people into hunting, gives more people a way to dive in, and like you can be as involved or uninvolved as you want to be. But it all still works.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. We always hunted public up in Pennsylvania, and it's crazy up there. I don't know if you ever hunted up north, but in Pennsylvania, it's rifle comes in like the Saturday or Sunday after Thanksgiving. It only lasts a couple weeks. And kind of where the part of Pennsylvania we're at, it is literally like a county-wide deer drive. I mean, that's how many hunters are out in the woods. There's orange everywhere. And you're always running into people. Sometimes they're polite, nice, and they'll move on. Sometimes they come down and just, cut you off 100 yards in front of you. So it's a whole nother type of way to hunt. But I guess, as long as you're getting out there, you're enjoying God's creation, and recharging your batteries, kind of meditating a little bit, shaking off all that stuff that happens to you the work week. That's what I enjoy about it, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's when you get to the core, like you said, you had a nice, good little spiritual experience, kind of a good moment after your dad passed, after shooting this deer. And that's what it's all about. It's all about family traditions, sharing those experiences with people, here and past, looking back at those memories. I know you probably had a flood of memories after this hunt. And again, condolences to you and your family. I hate that you lost him. But that's a big part about hunting. Like so on this same note, like my brother-in-law killed his best buck 2 nights ago, and I showed you. We went over and helped track him. Getting that text from a family member or from your dad or from somebody that, hey, I got him, I got him, I shot him. And being able to go and help track or help drag. That's what it's all about, man. I mean, like we love going to our hunting club, but I could just about go down there and not even hunt. Just go down there and sleep in, hang out with the guys, go check cameras, and then cook a good meal. I mean, it's the camaraderie, It's this right here talking about it. I mean, this is a big reason why I wanted to start this podcast, is to talk. People can share their stories. It encapsulates them. They'll be online and saved forever. And just getting to hear about deer getting killed, man. I mean, that's a big part of it for me.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like you said, there's a lot of things that happen in our lives. And I guess, for hunters, getting that big buck or having your buddy get that big buck or your son or your dad or your brother, like you're talking about, I'll remember that for the rest of my life. I'll remember those moments. I'll remember that crystal clear, like how the woods smelled, what temperature it was, all the little things that went wrong, all the little things that went right. Um, when I get that deer mounted, and my wife's not the biggest fan of deer mounts, I kind of won her over a little bit. But when you look at that mount, that trophy, I mean, I remember everything about that hunt, the days leading up to it, everything. And there's not a whole lot of things out there that can do that. You know what I'm saying? Besides, things that happen in your life with kids and families and weddings and stuff like that.
Nah, for real. I never really thought about it that way, but it's like that high level of adrenaline that quick. It's got to do something to your memory. Because like same way, like I love deer mounts. I mean, if you kill a deer that means a lot to you, get it mounted. I mean, that's my advice to anybody. My wife has a couple deer on the wall. I've got two or three, and it's like, yeah, they're expensive. I've had people say, man, that's $400 or $500 a piece, and now they're up pushing $600 some places. Like, man, do you really think it's smart to spend that money? I'm like, yeah. I mean, I can sit here and talk about this deer for the rest of my life, and like you said, remember every little detail, every little piece about that hunt. I mean, I mean, and yeah, it'll be something for my kids to deal with after I'm dead and gone. But that's something. Maybe they'll sell them, maybe they keep them. I don't know, but yeah, it'll be something for our future generations to have to worry about. But while I'm here, I love to talk about the stories behind them. And like you said, it's the memory. I mean, it's a crystal clear memory for all of them.
For sure, man. It's I'm just feel blessed, to be able to do that and hunt that property that I hunt. It's awesome.
Well, good deal, man. Well, it's getting late. We've got to get up and teach the hooligans in the morning, go stomp out some ignorance at the North Hall High School. So we'll go ahead and sign off. Thank you guys for listening, and tune in next time. Thank you for listening to the Bucktails Podcast.